It's Palm Sunday. And in verse 10 of today, it says that Jesus entered Jerusalem. The whole city was stirred up. And some asked, "Who is this? Who is this? Who is this that would create such a ruckus in the midst of this season?" Now, to invite us into the story, I want to put a couple lenses on our story to maybe reframe it. You see, the question of who is this is appearing because not everyone clearly who's gathered in Jerusalem that day understood or had heard about this prophet named Jesus, whose life and teachings and ministry had been moving throughout the region. He had been healing people. And last week, we read one of the stories that the Gospel of John, not Matthew, but John highlights as one of those tension points, the raising of Lazarus. And yet here we are, entering into Jerusalem near the festival of the Passover, when thousands would have been moving towards the city for that festival, for that celebration. The part of the story we likely have heard before, if we've been here on a Palm Sunday, is that Jesus would invite his disciples to take a colt, to untie it and bring it for him to enter into Jerusalem. I am curious of how it is that person that offered up the colt knew what was happening. They may have been a disciple that was quite quiet about that. They didn't make a big scene. Nonetheless, Jesus gets on this donkey and this colt, this small animal, and rides into Jerusalem. And in some ways, we're invited to think of that with our own palm branches waving as a parade, a celebration. And it is. And it's likely also a protest. You see, when Jesus is entering into Jerusalem, likely on another part of town would have been a sign of the Roman occupation. Likely Pilate or someone in that stature would have been riding a large horse with military in tow, making it clear to the people who gathered that we're in charge. We don't want you to cause any uprisings. We want to make sure you understand that we'll allow for this to happen as long as you play by the rules. Now, here's the irony that you might miss. The Passover festival is a festival that celebrates how God released a people in captivity out of Egypt and out of slavery, despite Egyptians' force and power being so great that quite literally the Spirit passed over their homes, and after plagues would finally be released to go out, and even after their release, Egypt would come after them. This is the story that is being celebrated at this festival, while at the same point, the presence of Rome is there to remind people, well, you have enough power to celebrate your festivals, but we're still in charge. And then amidst this, Jesus rides into town. And people respond, and in the midst of their response, it says that they take their cloaks off and lay them on the ground, that they yank branches off of trees, not necessarily palm branches, but they yanked them off, laid them on the ground as though they were welcoming a new king. Even the words they say, Hosanna, or if you're from the South, Hosanna. I mean, it is. If you were trained by a choir, it's Hosanna. If you live in the South, it's likely Hosanna. Hosanna to the Son of David. They are clearly pointing out and calling for, save us, Son of David. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, save us. They're longing for something different. Things as they are not working, and there's this kind of movement that you kind of feel as you join into the story. Bernice Miles, as she writes in Feasting on the Word, says it this way: "Save us," they cry out, creating a royal carpet of cloaks, and tree branches for this proclaimer of good news. Save us, they shout, reminding us that the stain of division still permeates the fabric of our existence, thwarting our ability to live in peace and threatening our collective well-being. Almost instinctively, shouts of Hosanna escape our lips, and we join this triumphal march, augmenting our Lenten commitment to a self-examination with reflection upon the quality of our lives. For peace and reconciliation become possible when common folk with uncommon courage oppose exclusionary practices and policies, and together stand with the one who comes in the name of the Lord. I'll say that again. For peace and reconciliation become possible when common folk with uncommon courage oppose exclusionary practices and policies, and together stand with the one who comes in the name of the Lord. History is replete with stories of common folk who have recognized that we are able to accomplish more together than we can alone. Stories that we might do well to reclaim and rehearse as we continue our Lenten journey. You see, friends, this Palm Sunday was not a parade. It probably reflected more of a protest than a parade. People were moved and drawn towards it, but they were drawn towards it because there was something different. There was something different about the one they were shouting and singing. This peace was not one that was born out of violence. It was not safety because of oppression. It was freedom. It was peace. It was reconciliation. It was wholeness. It was a glimpse of the beloved community, or the peace and the kingdom of God coming into their midst. They longed for something different. Now, sure, like us, they might put that hope into the system as it is, as though if we just had the right person, the system will get fixed. If we just have the right king, or president, or leader, all of this will get fixed. But the reality is that if you're paying attention, Jesus invites to a different way of living. He reframes how people should gather. Maybe some of those who are gathered didn't hear all those stories. And so it says that Jesus enters into town and he goes to the temple. The temple, that place of storytelling where they would share the stories of faith, where they would gather together. And Jesus enters that temple in Matthew 21 and throws out everybody who was selling and buying. He pushed over the tables that were used for currency exchange and the chairs of those who sold doves. He says, "It's written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you've made it, in the common English, a hideout of crooks," or a den of thieves, if you're reading the New Revised Standard. In the midst of that scattered place, which I'm sure added to the chaos and commotion, people who were blind and lame, who needed healing, come to Jesus in the temple. He begins healing them. The chief priests and the legal experts, the religious leaders, saw the amazing things he was doing, and the children shouting in the temple, "Hosanna to the Son of David." This is in verse 15. And they were angry. And they were angry. Now, it's important for us to note here that I appreciate our common English. It says the chief priests, the legal experts, those of the religious structure that held power and position. Some translations would say the Jews, which leads to some very deeply troubling anti-Semitic thought. So I want to make sure you understand here. The religious leaders that are holding this are in a really awkward place. On the most generous of days, I find myself reflecting, imagine that I might be in their position, holding the tensions of all this together. It's a deeply divided community in which they find themselves. On one side, the Roman government, who's made it very clear that as long as they stay in line, they'll be allowed to kind of hold the little bit of power that they have. But if you get out of line, we'll take you out. And the people whom they have been walking alongside but clearly have lost sight that which they carry should be for the benefit of the people. That it should be a word that brings healing and peace and reconciliation. That their work should bring about renewed wholeness and good. And that's gotten lost. So hold that together, and then you understand that they begin to get frustrated, and they say to Jesus, "Do you hear what those children are saying? They're saying, 'Hosanna to the Son of David.'" "Yes," Jesus answers. "I assure you that if you have faith, Yes, he answers, have you ever read from the mouths of babes and infants? You arranged praise for yourself. They are speaking a word of truth. How much have we said that, right? If we just listen to the mouths of children, we'll be reminded of some of the core truths we hold, or maybe of some of the core things we teach. Oh, that's a troubling thought. Gets me in trouble regularly. They're upset because the children are shouting what the parents have been teaching, that a day will come when we'll have a different leader, when we won't be in this oppression. They've been listening to the very story from their families, and in that moment they're gathering with the crowd and shouting, is this the one? Who is this? And they get caught up in the hope and belief that this is the one. Friends, in many ways, Palm Sunday invites us to get caught up with them. This Jesus that we celebrate and lift up is the one that we long for. He invites us to a different way of living. We do still live in divided times. We do still live in a time when you are asked to give your allegiance for powers that are broken, that need redemption, that need to be redeemed, even in our day and age. You're asked to pledge allegiance to those things which clearly are not in full alignment with God's desire for the creation, for the cosmos, and for our community, for healing, for reconciliation. And as hard as it is, the reality is we stand against that tension and those shouts as well. Yet we're invited to join with those of history, those common folk who had uncommon courage, to be those who call into question the way things are and hope for a world that looks different than it is, one built on peace and justice, one where all come to see they are fully loved and fully who God created them to be. Did you hear the words she lifted up earlier? For peace and reconciliation become possible when common folk with uncommon courage oppose exclusionary practices and policies, and together stand with the one who comes in the name of the Lord. She goes on to tell stories from history. They would include the women and men who provided safe passage on the Underground Railroad for persons seeking freedom from slavery. They would include Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others within the confessing church who took a definitive stance that their loyalty was to Jesus as Lord, not to Hitler or the Nazis. You could join with the youth in South Africa against apartheid. You could stand throughout time and history and hear many of those same voices time and time again join and raise their voices. Just a few years ago, we had a similar tension. In 2018, the same week that there was the big military parade in Washington, thousands of high school students walked out of their high schools saying we're tired of coming to school in fear because we can't seem to come to any common sense gun reform. Friends, we live in a deeply divided time. And I wonder if we would get caught up in that crowd and shout a few hosannas ourselves, because we long for the world to be different. Well, friends, what I want to offer you is this. That question of who is this is still a question for us to answer. Who is this Jesus of Nazareth? And does his life and the way of living that he invites us still make a difference in the world? If we're not ready to proclaim yes, then maybe we need to spend a little more time with him, reading the stories and encountering and recognizing that we join with that band and that movement of people who took courage and joined on that march into Jerusalem. Amidst so many of the uncertainties, they walked into the city believing that this is the prophet, the Jesus of Nazareth. This is the one who's going to bring about something different in the world. This is the one who brings God's peace and love and justice and grace. Let's not throw in the towel. Let's not drop the branches and walk away from the march, but let's join in and be a part of that, uniting our voices and our hearts for the good of the world. Raising our voices up to be a voice of reconciliation and justice, of proclaiming that, yes, this Jesus of Nazareth, this is the one that we seek to follow. this is the one that we seek to worship and celebrate. And maybe, just maybe, this is the one who will help guide us to see the world become more of what it should be. Friends, this Palm Sunday leads us into a story where we see power and love in a different light. And my hope is you'll join us on this journey this week, and that you might be able to more fully answer, who is this Jesus? And what does he have for my life? Thanks be to God. Amen.